Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 28th episode of Beyond Talking Points with Matt and Matt. Today, we are going to have a conversation on anarchism generally. I sent my friend here a couple videos of Noam Chomsky explaining why he is an anarchist. And I wanted to have this conversation, or I thought it would be a very productive conversation because Matt considers himself to be an anarcho-capitalist. So, the anarchy is it's a very broad brush. That there are many different kinds of anarchism. Political philosophy, the terms aren't very precise. There's often a lot of different variations of particular political philosophies, and anarchism is no different. Anarchism, I think, if I remember correctly, it just derives from the Greek word archaea, which just means no government. And the history of anarchism is interesting, and it kind of goes back to certain philosophers in ancient Greece or ancient China. And as I said, the variations are wide. But I guess I wanted to sort of focus on where I think Chomsky's form of anarchism is more correct, and where I think anarcho-capitalism might not give the answers that I think an anarchist philosophy should be giving. So, an anarchist, how should I put it? To be, I'll put it like this. So an anarchist, originally, the at least anarchism in the way that we understand it today, so Emma Goldman, Peter Kropotkin, etc., it was a form of far left politics. It was basically another branch of communism. You had the Marxists and the anarchists, and the Marxists and the anarchists agreed that communism, or a stateless, classless, moneyless society, is the end goal, but they disagree about how to get to that end goal. And so the anarcho-capitalist basically throws that on its head, because it takes a important part of at least traditional anarchist philosophy and says that it's wrong. That doesn't necessarily mean that anarcho-capitalists defend the kind of capitalism that we have, but it does mean that they are defending a kind of capitalism of sorts, however we're going to define these terms. And because I'm enough of a anti-capitalist, I am skeptical of the kinds of anarchism that is that advocates for capitalism. And I was also thinking, I'll just add one more quick point. I think I don't really like the way ancaps use language, or like the way they conceptualize ideologies and the different terminologies that you use in philosophy and whatnot. So, and maybe this is even where I differ from Chomsky a bit. Chomsky is more of that traditional kind of anarchism. He believes in worker control of the worker control of factories, basically worker-run economies, but he's also very pro democracy. He thinks democracy and anarchism go hand in hand, and he is, and he believes this because he thinks that I believe he calls himself technically an anarcho-syndicalist, although that's more of a method of getting to the end goal rather than a comprehensive political philosophy. But he believes that people have certain creative potential, and that to unleash that creative potential, we need to have anarchy. But what I don't like about a lot of ANCAP philosophy and ANCAP talking points is the way they use language. So anyone who's not an ANCAP is by definition, or by their own definition, an authoritarian. And that to me is just, that's so outside the I guess I even have trouble like almost conceptualizing that in a sense. I mean, it's like, I mean, I don't want to be flippant about it, but it's almost like how religious people, when they're like, well, if you don't believe in the religion the way I interpret this religion, then you're going to hell. Well, if you don't believe in the non-aggression principle, and if you don't believe in these ANCAP policies, then you're by definition an authoritarian, excuse me. But, I guess I would just add two more points. Like I said, what is authoritarianism? Or when I think of authoritarianism, I think of Pol Pot, I think of Joseph Stalin, I think of Mussolini, I think of Hitler. And so to be a political philosophy in which anyone who disagrees with you is by definition authoritarian, I think that's limiting, and I think that's an unfair caricature. But even if I agree with even if I agree with the ANCAP understanding and say just anything that's not ANCAP is authoritarian, at that point, the label really doesn't mean anything, because you can just call pretty much anything authoritarian, but there are certain things where an authority is fine, is necessary. You said you believe in hierarchies, so the idea that there are authorities in certain situations, perfectly fine with me. But I think I should probably let you jump in here. I don't know how well I did at kind of giving a general overview of anarchism, but these are just some of the thoughts I've been having over the last week, and I thought they might be a good place to start.
Yeah, I think that's a really good starting point, because I think you did a good background on kind of what we watched in general about Chomsky, and kind of bringing him into the mix of the traditional anarchy. And a lot of what we talk about is kind of your brand of, I guess, stateless democracy that I often object to. And then I'm like totally coming from an ANCAP side. And then at first, when you start bringing up the authoritarian definition and us talking about that, I was like, do we really want to relitigate this? But then on the other hand, you're able to tie it into hierarchy. So I think it is worth getting at. I really think where we differ on the word authoritarian is just the connotation of it. So I think when you hear authoritarian, you think it's the most extreme version of statism. But I kind of say when you yield to the state and let the state force something on a bunch of people, whether they like it or not, that action is an authoritarian action. You can just defend it in times, right? So if you thought it was for the best of everybody, if you thought you were pushing something on everybody when 90% of people agreed on it, you can say, well, yeah, I forced it on 10% of people, but 90% like it, and that's a trade-off I'm willing to make. So I'm okay with people defending it, but I would say, but by definition, if you're using the state to force anything on people, then it's authoritarian. You don't have to think that's bad, and I'm not trying to call it Hitler. I'm just saying that's what using the state is. You're leveraging a body that's the monopoly on violence on people who don't necessarily want to go along with it. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to claim that people are like Mussolini and Hitler and the classic fascists, or like what people in common conversation would think of when you say a tyranny. I'm not trying to paint that image. I'm just saying using the state is inherently, you're using an authoritarian body to push things on some people. That's the simple point I'm trying to make. I'm not trying to add that connotation. I mean, I'm disgusted by it, which is why I say I feel that connotation, but I know you don't have that same intrinsic reaction a lot of the time. and I think that's perfectly fine. Now, I like how that segues into hierarchies, because when I was listening to Chomsky, I realized a lot of why me and Chomsky end up on completely different ends of the playing field, even though we both are anarchists to some degree, is we think different kind of hierarchies are legitimate, right? And this is when I was listening to Chomsky, why I kind of could see how he's starting the conversation at a place that I think is reasonable, but then the kinds of hierarchies he defends, I don't see why he defends some and takes down other ones. I just don't think he's making any really compelling points that are convincing to me. So do you want to tie the loop on how I guess I explain away calling people authoritarians? And I think some people who aren't ANCAPs could maybe be not authoritarian if they don't want to use the state, right? So I'm fine with that. I don't think you have to be an ANCAP, but that's just how I'm defending it. And if you think the connotation like is that important, then that's fine. We can agree to disagree there. But that's kind of just where I stand on using that phrase, and I think I defended it well enough to justify my usage of it.
I guess I would tie the loop by saying a provocative statement and then working backwards to illustrate my logic. If my ideal of stateless democracy is authoritarian, then your ideal of an anarcho-capitalist society is also authoritarian. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there's two things. One, in an anarcho-capitalist society, the authority, if you'll pardon the phrase, is the market. That is what, if you are in an anarcho-capitalist society, and let's just assume for the sake of argument that for some reason you're in an anarcho-capitalist society and you just don't have a way to leave that anarcho-capitalist society. Okay, you are subject to the forces of the market, period. That is it. That you just have to live with that. And I object to those market forces being what is most important within human life, and I think that I guess that is under the first part, but the second part has to do with another use of the word authoritarian, which I know you disagree with. Corporations are authoritarian. Businesses can be authoritarian, and they can be authoritarian because they can destroy natural resources that we are just. Capitalism is literally destroying the planet. To be a capitalist or to own a factory or to own the means of production means you are depriving other people of the ability to own the means of production, and you are forcing people into situations where they have to work for you or they have to work for someone like you just to survive. So if you want to use this broad brush and you want to say, if you don't believe, if you're not an ANCAP, then you're authoritarian, then, I think the logic follows that at that point, everything is authoritarian because everything at some level is based on authority. And to be an authority means you can push your values, your beliefs. You can use your will is law in a sense, and so I'm happy to concede. If we want to use, let me put it like this. I'm willing to maybe backtrack that if we can agree that if we can agree that both of our versions of government of or both of our end goals aren't authoritarian, then I'll happily concede and backtrack everything I just said. But I just don't think you agree with that, because you think even democracy is authoritarian, because it's the will of the majority against the minority. So it's just, I have an issue with. I mean, I get part of it is just the negative connotation, but part of it just has to do with, again, at that level, or at that level of argument, I think you can say anything's authoritarian. The parent's relationship with the child at some level, you could say, is authoritarian. Does that, that doesn't mean it. But you told me, that you really believe in the family structure. So that's a form of authoritarianism that you believe in. We can play these. We can use, almost done. we can use words in this very loose definition, in order to. How do I put it? I just think we need to be very careful with the way we use the term authoritarian, because I think, historically speaking, authoritarianism really means when the government, when a government takes control of practically every aspect of a society, can take control of the economy, can take control of the media and journalism, takes control of speech and thought and religion. But as far as I know, you're not willing to concede that, because you find authoritarianism in everything, in not everything else. You find authoritarianism elsewhere, and so at that point, I just think everyone's basically authoritarian, and no one comes out looking good. I mean, unless we're willing to concede that authoritarianism is in some instances okay. But ANCAPs say, no, they're anti-authoritarian. Authoritarianism is always bad. So, maybe you could help me square that circle.
Yeah. Okay. I think I can help you square the circle. So, one thing is the stateless democracy thing. I would say it's not authoritarian if there wasn't a government enforcement mechanism, but the democracy part implies that there would be some way to enforce the collective, vote, even though not everybody would really agree to it. So, I mean, if everybody, if 1,000 people went off on their own piece of land and then they made all the decisions collectively and they all decided that's okay, then that's not authoritarianism, because there's no enforcement. They all just go along with it, and I wouldn't call that authoritarian. Now, I guess if you want to kind of broaden out authoritarianism even further than me, I guess I'm okay with that, because I think authoritarianism is a spectrum. So if you want to say there are still some degrees that what I'm saying is authoritarian, then I would probably say, okay, well, if I cede that, then I would say that I'm still at the lowest point of authoritarianism possible. And since I find, in general, authoritarianism objectionable, at least I'm on the lowest point, right? I think of it as a scale. Now, there were a few things you said in there that I kind of just wanted to take apart. So you said in an ANCAP society, you're at the will of the market. And I think that kind of language is used a lot in political circles. And it's like very much misses what happens in any kind of business transaction. Because in marketplaces, you have goods, you have people who want goods, and you have people with currency. But there's no reason why I would interact with everybody in that space, or even a majority of people in that space. I interact with such a small fraction of people in the market that I'm not really at the will of like the homogenous being of the market, because there is no homogenous being of the market. I interact with certain things that I buy, right? I'm drinking Diet Pepsi right now. So when I go to the corner store and buy a Diet Pepsi, I'm interacting with certain supply chains. I'm interacting with my corner store. I'm interacting with the Pepsi brand and the producers of Pepsi. But I'm not interacting with pretty much everything they sell at Whole Foods as an organization, or anything on that realm. So they were completely irrelevant. I wasn't at the will of Whole Foods, even though Whole Foods is part of the market, right? So when you say you're at the will of the market, it's like, well, what does that really mean? Because you're only at the will of the things you like and pick out specifically in the market, or the things that you potentially need. But needs are so variable from individual to individual that it's hard to clearly say that you're being, having this market like pressed onto you. Because although there are some basic things, like you hypothetically need some level of income to sustain some level of life in terms of sustenance, you can get sustenance in so many different ways that there's no one homogenous being that says sustenance costs this much money. You can buy bread, you can buy eggs, you can buy beef. There are so many things that like you can't really paint this as one thing like you could with a governing body. So I kind of reject that when using the language of like the market. It's like, well, there are market forces of supply and demand interacting in every product, in every brand, at every different kind of location, whether it be a convenience store or a grocery store. And then same with housing, every market is different depending on the region and how much the demand and supply is. So it's like, sure, you're at the will of how scarce is a resource and how many other people want the resource. But everybody's acting voluntarily and everybody's acting on their own preferences. And it gets allocated based on how much you want something and how much of your income you're willing to spend on it. And I'm much more okay with that than I am the kind of hierarchies that I guess you defend, which is a majority vote can typically overrule things like, and that's generally kind of okay. And I think that's objectionable. But I think, you know, if somebody has a lot of something, but a ton of people want it, I'm okay with the person who has it selling it to people based on how much they're willing to pay. I think that's reasonable. And that is how you deal with scarcity in the world right now. So I think that's why I think that's kind of a legitimate hierarchy. And I kind of find it odd that Chomsky takes all these hierarchies. I'm like, well, this hierarchy is based completely on voluntary action. I feel like voluntary action is the way to derive a legitimate hierarchy because everybody who's involved wants to partake in it, right? I mean, obviously the family structure, which you alluded to, is different because I'm not a big defender of family values. I don't know if I've said that at some point. Maybe I said that at one point. I'm very indifferent about that whole thing. And you can chalk that up to it's just the default. So we do it and that's whatever. But in general, the kind of things I talk about when I talk about as capitalism without the state involved is based on voluntary. You do what you want. If you want a certain type of thing, you can buy it. But if other people want it, then you have to outbid them. And if somebody has a resource, they can choose who they sell it to or who they interact with. It's all about freedom of association and, you know, selling your goods to who you want. And I think that's the most legitimate form of hierarchy. And I don't see why other arbitrary things that involve you know, people being able to vote away, say, my income is any way more reasonable than that is. So that's kind of where I was starting to kind of feel myself at odds with Chomsky because I like the idea of being an anarchist should be evaluating what hierarchies exist and which ones are legitimate. But I somehow end up thinking a bunch more are legitimate, and then all the ones that he supports are things I'm kind of, I don't want to say like I'm disturbed by them, but I don't find myself morally aligned with them really in any capacity, which is kind of odd because I was accepting kind of his premise about hierarchies. So I think I'll let you jump in.
So I'd like to begin my first point by mentioning the most famous philosopher in Western history, Socrates. So Socrates kind of had two philosophical principles: never submit and never have faith. And when I say never have faith, he means never take anything for granted, never believe something just because someone told you it. Think critically for yourself and analyze and examine to decide whether that what he or she said is legitimate or illegitimate. And I bring it up because I think those are good principles to try to live your life by, and I try to live my life by those principles. But I think it has to be said that we cannot live in a world or a world in which there is no pressure on you or people don't I'm trying to think of the exact word here. I don't think it's possible to live in a world where we are basically autonomous units. And if you're in a hierarchy, which we both seem to acknowledge are legitimate, we just disagree on the kind of hierarchy, perhaps. But if you are in a hierarchy of some sort, whether it's a family unit or just the way the market kind of plays out, or maybe the hierarchy that we have now with a centralized government. In any particular hierarchy that you can talk about, there are people who are kind of in charge of you, and then maybe you're in charge of some people under you. I'm not necessarily talking about a business, although that might be an even better example. And this almost goes back to our conversation about individualism and collectivism. So to be in a group of people, even if it's completely voluntary, means that you do not, you do not behave in certain ways, or you do not say certain things. You need to be in any group means you kind of have to agree to certain premises or certain rules or certain ideas, or you just can't be part of that group. So, in our society, for example, you basically have to agree to follow, certain laws, to pay your taxes, and if you don't do those things, obviously, your life becomes much worse. And we can say that either those two examples are wrong, but I don't think we can say that the idea that we can be in a world where there are no rules is kind of inconceivable to me. Again, even in an anarcho-capitalist society, there would be rules you would have to follow, or you couldn't live in that anarcho-capitalist society, or at least something bad might happen to you. And that's just kind of the way that's just kind of what it means to be a human being. I think I bring up this example a lot, but Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War, when it came to slavery, he somewhat vacillated. For some time he was like, well, we should ship all the slaves to Madagascar, and then he was like, well, maybe we could free some slaves, not free others. But eventually he decided, okay, I'm going to impose my will. I'm going to say slavery is wrong, and you have to obey that idea. We are going to be in a society that without slavery, and you have to obey that. You cannot have a slave no matter what, and if you do, then you will be punished somehow. That is an example where somebody is using their authority. Somebody is willing something to be so, and people generally speaking would say, Abraham Lincoln was justified to do so. So I think it really depends on there's I don't even want to say imposing your will, because that's a bad way of describing it, but there has to be some way for us to come to agreements about what to do, and then we have to follow those agreements in order to just have a smooth, healthy, vibrant society. Did you want to respond to that? Because I have two other points I'd like to add.
We need to unpack a lot of there. Okay. So I thought you were going to go double down on the business example, but then you didn't, which was kind of disappointing, because then you brought it back to society, and then that just reiterates the social contract whole thing. And that's kind of a dead end for us. The reason why I was hoping you wrap around to businesses is because obviously when I go to work, there are certain rules. And one of the good things about those rules is I agreed to them, because I don't have to work for that employer. They invited me on their private property. I show up to do a specific job at a specific wage, and they pay me. And maybe I can get promoted if I show that I'm a valuable asset, and maybe there is flexibility in my role. But in general, this is a voluntary agreement with contractual terms, and I can generally leave at will. So I'm totally fine with that. Now, then when you start talking about society's rules, what you're really talking about a lot of times is public property's rules, right? So you're talking about what we can and can't do outside of the comfort of our homes. Well, the way the ANCAP society resolves this isn't that they have different rules or that there are no rules. It's just that you don't have public property. So you have your property, and you can have whatever rules you want on your property as long as you're giving people, the opportunity to enter into that contract when they enter your property, right? So I can't be unreasonable and clearly and know that I own a plot of land, but there's no sign I have that plot of land. I can't just say, well, my rule is I shoot on sight and you stepped foot on that and you didn't even know it, but I shot you anyways. Like, that would be unreasonable, and nobody's going to be okay with that. But there are going to be arbitrators in a system that doesn't even need the government to take on those edge cases. But in general, if you wanted to hang out at my house, I might have rules that are much more authoritarian than the United States government has, but it doesn't matter because it's my house. You don't have to come here. You knew the rules before you came here. We all agreed to them. If you decided like, oh, I don't like that I can't say whatever at Matt's house, even though I could normally say that on public property in the United States, and he'll kick me out and the government wouldn't. It's like, sure, I could be more authoritarian, but it doesn't matter. It's on my private property and you voluntarily agreed and I voluntarily invited you and everything was consensual. Then that's why I get so hung up on the social contract argument, is because much like slavery, to take a cheap shot, it's a contract I didn't agree to. I'm here, right? I'm here. I was born here, and I would have to get a lot of permits from both our government and other governments if I wanted to leave. And there isn't really anywhere I could live without a government. So I'm not trying to say it's similar to slavery, other than the fact that neither of those are legitimate contracts in any way of thinking about contract law, because they'd be voided based on the fact that there was no agreement. You just are stuck there, right? So I didn't consent to it. I'm not saying that I'm literally a slave, and I wouldn't say that I'm a slave of the government, although people are apt to make those analogies because it's probably similar to the comparison I laid out. So that's kind of where I stand. Obviously, I'm for rules. Yeah, but I'm not okay with public property, because then it's just a bunch of people asserting their rules and then 60-40 wins, and then it goes beyond public property because then it inserts itself into like my work, right? And then it takes 30% of my income because other people voted it away. Well, in my look at things, you don't have public property. People can make rules on their own property, and then we abide by people's rules and respect what they want. And if you don't like somebody's rules, you don't interface with them. You find alternatives, and there are alternatives to almost everything. That's why people act like you're a slave to your employer, but there are a ton of jobs out there. So if you think one employer is too rigorous or expects too much, you quit that job because they have bad work-life balance. And that's why employers all the time are trying to give employees good work-life balance nowadays. Is because they know that employees want that, right? So that's how things would. I'm okay with that conception of how things would function. And I just want to note, hopefully we'll have time to backtrack to it, but I do like the Socrates quotes you laid out, and maybe it'll be for another day. Maybe I'll steal those two things to set up a different conversation. But there's definitely questions I have about a lot of the things that Chomsky lays out and some ancaps lay out that I feel like are taken for granted, that give me great distress. And that's part of why I'm not on your guys' boat. So I need to put that in my brain to remember to wrap back around to that at some point. So feel free to respond and then move on to your other 2 points.
I guess I'll just quickly respond by saying that I think at some level the idea of consent breaks down. So I did not consent to be a U.S. citizen, but I do not see that as somehow a deprivation or slavery. Not that you would say it's slavery, or I don't see it as a way for other people to take away my freedom. I see for all the problems the United States has, and it has plenty. I'm not going to sit here and act like the country's the greatest country on earth. I was watching the Republican National Convention last night, and all it is people saying America is the greatest country on earth. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is that for lack of a better term, perhaps the social contract gives you a kind of freedom that you cannot have otherwise. Now, do you need to respond? Would you like to respond to that, or shall I move on to my other 2 points?
I guess I'll just say that I disagree, just given that our conception of positive freedom is different. So we'd probably define freedom differently. So then you think that agreeing to the social contract puts you in the society. And I don't think you need that social contract to interact with other people, right? Because I don't need to agree to the US government to go to my corner store. I shouldn't have to. So I don't think the government makes me more free. But if you think that's a requisite to live in a society, then you can think that. That's fine. But I think if everybody had private property, you'd be just as free because you can interact with who you want to, just like we kind of do now, but it would be minus the taxes and stuff.
I'm saying something a little different, though.
Well, I think I was just
rephrase that.
I think I got you were making a broader point, but I think I was just trying to take the narrow part of why I think I disagree with just a little bit of it, right?
Okay, what I was trying to say was, it's not so much that I'm not saying you need the U.S. government to interact with, the corner store. But what I'm saying is the U.S. government is an extension, however flawed, of the rules and the values that that everyone uses in their day-to-day life. But I guess I'll move on to my other 2 points quickly. I don't want to sidetrack us too much. So when I talk about when I make broad claims about how you're under our society, but also under an ANCAP society, you are the market is in charge, so to speak. I guess what I'm trying, it maybe it's slightly misleading. It's probably better to say that those in the top of the hierarchy, that is, or in the top of the hierarchy that can occur during within a free market, those people are imposing, or those are the people that you are beholden to at some level, and I even mean that not just like the top 10 richest people on earth, but I mean everyone down that hierarchy of needs, all the way to the principal I was going to say principal at a school. That might not be a good example, but my point being that you are answerable to all the various stage levels of hierarchy that are above you within the free market system, and you are just because you're not working for a particular company or for a particular person doesn't mean that what they do doesn't affect you. And so when I say that in an ANCAP society you are you are control, or the market is the authority, what I'm saying is in a society in which free market relations are prioritized, I guess I'm saying two things. I'm saying that I think, one, that's kind of a cheap way to live, and that I would much prefer to be in a society where there are better ways to interact with people. But I'm also saying that that whatever the people within that hierarchy do, it will affect you somehow, some way, indirectly or directly, because you are sharing, whether it's a town or a city or a state or a country or the planet. I mean, and so pollution is just an easy example. In China, in China, for example, people have to wear face masks all the time because the air is just so polluted. And I'm not trying to get into the conversation. Well, what is China in terms of economic policy and whatnot? But I am saying that that's an easy example where certain people's certain people's ideas and beliefs are being imposed on others. People, they ship jobs to China, or they set up a factory in China because it's cheap, because they don't have to pay as much to the workers, because they don't have to worry so much about company safety, and they are trying to make a profit, and that profit is more important than the Chinese people's right, or it's more important than the Chinese people's ability to or need to have clean air.
Okay, so a lot of things that you're talking about, I guess, could loosely be categorized as externalities of the market. A lot of them I'd push back against for like a wide variety of reasons, usually topic by topic. Now, to some extent, the environmental one and vaguely pollution as a whole phenomena is kind of hard to talk about in general, because like the most reasonable thing to do is to try to revitalize individuals' rights, and by giving them some sort of property claim to a fraction of the environment in whatever area they're in, right? So then at least the environment that directly affects you most, you'd have to sell off your right to polluting it to people who want to pollute it in terms of production. And then in that way, in their business model, they have to account for paying for their pollution, and you get the money that they had to spend, right? I think that's an okay solution, but then it's not really, because, well, if everybody sells off their rights and I don't, I still have to deal with it, because it's too, you can't really apply property rights to that. Because it's just the air. I still think that's a better solution than, say, like a carbon tax, but it's something. So that's like kind of one of those weird anomalies that's hard to respond to. But then when you talk about, say, like outsourcing jobs, then you kind of like weigh into the idea of positive rights really quickly when you're kind of trying to make the case for that. And I don't know if that's something we want to dwell on. But I'm going to put a footnote on that, and then you can decide in the meantime, as I address the first part of what you were saying, if we want to, I guess, come back to positive rights or not. So we were talking about the hierarchy in a capitalist society, and there are certain people who you're kind of beholden to some extent. Well, I think one of the beauties of the capitalist society, though, is those people, although there are a lot of them, the more you spread it out, the more there are, the more diffuse the power is, right? So to some extent, let's say I go to the store and I want to buy an orange. Well, the people who sold oranges to the grocery store, who's at the top of that supply chain, to some extent, I'm somewhat beholden to the person at the top of that supply chain that decides whether they produce oranges or not. Now, if you reflect back about 12 episodes ago, I'm just spitting out a number, but it's the Defending Anarcho-Capitalism episode. You gave me that prompt about how anarchy is the truest form of democracy, and then I spun it around in the way that author definitely didn't intend to put it, where I said, bidding in a market is kind of voting in a way that actually matters, because you're saying, I'll buy your good for this price. And if a ton of people want to buy something, but you only have a little bit, then you voted with your money, and they're like, oh, we're going to make way more of that then, because we can make a profit, and a ton of people are willing to buy it at that price. So then production happens as a result of all this demand. So to some extent, at the top of all of these individual hierarchies of producers of different goods, which, as I mentioned, the power is very diffused because you can only be a hegemon of so many goods, right? They're beholden to people wanting to buy their stuff. If you make a product, even if you're a huge company like, I don't know, like Hasbro, they probably make a lot of money. Let's say they have a huge amount of profit, right? So Hasbro can afford losses. But if they make a bunch of stuff nobody wants, nobody is going to buy it. It's going to end up on a clearance rack for a tenth of the cost, the tenth of the amount it costs them to make it, and they're going to lose a ton of money because nobody wanted it. They're still beholden to the people who buy their product. So I would say that's more, you have more accountability in capitalism to your consumers than any form of government we've discussed. And then I would say the power is diffused because there's dozens and dozens of different kinds of hierarchies. And then I would say the most destructive ones in our society that relate to, say, capitalism are in the financial sector, generally related to the Federal Reserve and how they control the money supply and the interest rate. And that's what ends up causing most of the problems in our economy. So I guess I would say if you didn't have them involved, sure, you do have hierarchies, but it's based on people owning a supply of goods, owning a plant, and then if you want the stuff, you buy it. If you don't even want it, it doesn't even matter, because you didn't want their good anyways. So they have no power over you because you don't care about action figures for something you don't watch and you don't want the memorabilia for, right? So Yeah, I think that's a general thought about that. And then earlier in the episode today, you mentioned when somebody owns the means of production of something, it takes the means of production away from other people who could own it. But that's kind of vaguely defined, given that the means of producing things could be something as simple as a laptop now. I mean, at work, we don't have literal things that put together goods. We all have computers, and those computers have software, right? So, like the fact that I own a computer doesn't deprive somebody else of having a computer, because they could just buy a computer, or I don't know. Computers are generally inexpensive. Me owning one doesn't keep everybody else in the world from having one. Um, they're generally accessible. A lot of software is relatively accessible. So as we've progressed, in 2020, there are a lot less barriers to entrepreneurial ventures or small businesses. So I think that means of production thinking that is very broad and only kind of talks about specific factories for specific things really kind of starts to lose its sway. And I just kind of don't like that vernacular. Um, so yeah, I spit like three things at you, and I think you've jotted down some stuff. So go for it.
Okay, so it's hard to know. I guess I will try to respond to a few things you just said, and then after you've responded to my responses, I'll give you my third original point that I had. So first point, and I'm actually this is something that Chomsky said in one of the videos that I sent you. You'll probably remember he brought up Adam Smith, and Chomsky said that Adam Smith, you can hear me, right? Chomsky said that Adam Smith thought that the market was a. Go ahead.
I just want to jump in on the Adam Smith thing. I know the viewers probably haven't watched the clip. I hated this part of what Chomsky had to say, so I just kind of want to maybe cut this off at the knees to save time because we are kind of on a time crunch. So Adam Smith's argument that Chomsky talks about, he pretty much says everybody misrepresents Adam Smith, and he says Adam Smith really only likes free markets because he thinks free liberty will lead to like complete equality in some sense. So I think I just want to jump in and say, I think that was a weird appeal to authority that Chomsky said, kind of as a gotcha. And I don't care about that conception of Adam Smith's thought, because if Adam Smith thinks that, I think he's wrong, and I think it's a bad point, and I don't even think equality is a good end goal. So maybe I'll throw that into your conception to give the quick background on it, and then I just wanted to jump in because I don't think highly of Adam Smith, and if that's what Chomsky says Adam Smith really is, then I'm like, okay, who cares? I think Adam Smith's wrong now too. So kind of want to jump in front of
that. Okay, so my interpretation of what Chomsky said Adam Smith was arguing was as follows. Adam Smith thought that the market was a good way, or the market was a good way to distribute goods and services at the point where there is, at the point where people are on an equal playing field. Now, it doesn't even necessarily have to be perfect equality. Maybe that's what Adam Smith thought. Maybe he did think it had to be perfect equality. But my issue, I suppose, with anarcho-capitalism as a whole is because it would basically start at where we. Okay, let's just assume that like tomorrow, the U.S. is a collection of ANCAP countries. Let's just not countries, because they wouldn't be countries, but let's just say that the whole main mass that is the United States became anarcho-capitalist tomorrow, and that would mean that at the very start, there is already massive economic inequality. There's already massive economic differences, and that would just increase the longer anarcho-capitalism was put into place. So you can say that markets are a good thing, or that markets are the best way to run a society, but they're not the best thing when you have not taken into account that people are incredibly that I don't have as much as Bill Gates, but a homeless person in my hometown might have even less than I do. It doesn't take into account the different material circumstances of individuals, and I think that is fundamentally unjust.
Okay, so I don't think part of that is endemic to ANCAP philosophy, because ANCAPs don't really, as far as I know, there isn't a hugely agreed on canonized way to get from point A to point B into Ancapistan. And that's mostly because, much like your ideal, mine's not going to happen anytime soon. And I know there is some work on it, but I do think a lot of ANCAPs think some of the most wealthy people have gotten wealthy unjustly. Now, if somebody got wealthy in a just manner, just based on people wanting their stuff and they sold at a high profit, then I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that person having plenty of money. But if in the intermediary phase, if you wanted to show somebody unfairly used cronyism to give themselves a ton of wealth, right? And then you want to confiscate it to them before we go to Ancapistan, I don't know if I really mind. And I think the assertion that being an ANCAP society would inherently make income inequality worse, I don't know if that's founded upon. Just because when people attribute income inequality growing to capitalism, they're really referring to our current state capitalism, and that's corporatism, and we wouldn't have that in Ancapistan. So I'm not convinced that a free market would actually lead to more income inequality, but I am convinced that corporatism does, because corporatism likes to enrich the rich further. So we agree on that criticism of corporatism. And then I would say the way you deal with the people who are super homeless is people collectively agree on things, right? So all the people who enter voluntary interaction and you say, we want to help this guy. Charity's not illegal, right? You can still help somebody if you have more stuff than them, but you guys just volunteer to do it. So if you know some people are poor, you guys say, okay, well, this guy has a little space of land. Let's set up a mini homeless shelter here. And you can still come in and contribute to that. There's no problem with doing a voluntary welfare.
Okay, I had something I was going to say, but I forgot. So I'm just going to keep going down this list until until we're done with the episode, or until you have to go. So I'm going to skip positive rights for now. That's something we need to come back to, but I'm going to skip it for now. Okay, so the next point. I agree with you that the market, or the capitalism, generally speaking, has led to more democracy, or has led to more people having a say in the kind of world that they want. You don't have to call that democracy. Give it a different name, but it has enfranchised more and more people. But I think my criticism, and the criticism that Chomsky and many other left-wing anarchists have, is that and some Marxists have, is that I don't think capitalism is continuing to do that. I think the historical trajectory that we're seeing is that we are actually getting less and less equality, less and less enfranchisement. That might be a better word, than we were. And I think looking at the third world is a perfect example of that. And then to respond to your point about how the means of production has been expanded now that people have iPhones and laptops and whatnot. That's true, but my contention is that the economy should be run by the people. The economy needs to be responsive to the people. The economy needs to be, or the average person needs to be able to help, needs to be able to get their 2 cents in, and be allowed to implement policies which are good for the majority rather than the minority. And I'll just get one more quick point in, the third final point that I had, and then you can kind of respond to all this and we'll see what happens. I think the reason that Chomsky supports government in a sense, in his concept of hierarchy, and probably the reason why I support government in a sense, although I would not call myself a statist, as has been said, is because governments have the capability of they have the capability of increasing or decreasing the material. They have okay. Let me backtrack. Governments have the capability of affecting the material conditions on or of the people within that country. So the U.S. government potentially could give everybody could give everybody a house or at least an apartment. Everyone could have a roof over their head. We wouldn't necessarily have to have any homeless people. We could probably give everyone a car or a laptop. We could distribute goods and services in a way to where nobody doesn't need or is at least in the sense that people are without the bare essentials, and we don't do that. And you can say that governments were originally unjust, but it's interesting because you literally just said that if somebody earns money unjustly, then you are not against per se taking some of that money back. And so then it becomes a situation where we're just bickering over the price. I might say that taxes are legitimate, and you would say, well, no, taxes aren't legitimate, but it would be legitimate to take away someone's wealth if they got it unjustly. And
when I say unjustly, I only mean in terms of the state enriching them, though. I don't mean it as in like unfair in the way that I only mean in state enrichment terms, though.
But why should we be allowed to take away their wealth?
Because the state gave it to them. I'd be okay with conceding you can take, if you want to reset, you can take the wealth away from the people who the state gave it to because they got it unfairly, because the state used violence to get it. I'm okay with that kind. And I'm not okay with it if like somebody sells like J.K. Rowling, like people wanted to read Harry Potter. So she made her money, and that's fine. That was all voluntary. But if somebody is like a CEO of a crony capitalist business that only exists because the government subsidized them for a decade, and then the people who do the reset want to, drop that person's standard of living because they were only existed due to subsidies, and which are based on violence, then I'm okay with that. I'm not going to get too riled up. It's kind of like when Trump gave those stimulus checks. Like, I didn't burn mine. I cashed it. Right? Because they steal money from me and they give money back to me. So I'm like, okay, I'll cash it. I'm not going to burn it.
Okay, but again, then we're just saying that we then at some level we agree that redistribution can be good. We just don't agree on the kinds or on the way that redistribution should be implemented, or we don't agree on the kind of redistribution, because earlier you actually did say you were in favor of, at some level, of a kind of redistribution, and stealing money from somebody who got money from the government, that is a form of redistribution. Okay, it might be unjust in your view, but you are saying therefore that is okay at some level, at least in that particular circumstance. So again, I think
we're squabbling over a non-philosophical point.
No, hold on, I'm not done.
Okay, that's fine. You can finish it. I'm just gonna immediately backtrack by telling you that the point I made was, in the interim, I don't really care because we're gonna get to the Ancapistan, right? So I was saying, if you want to define it this way and undo something to get to Ancapistan, that's fine, because we'll get to Ancapistan and I'll take that for the 1 month of redistribution. But I'm not saying, as a rule, redistribution's fine. I'm more saying, well, if you're giving me Ancapistan, I'll take it for the 1 month.
You're saying it's fine in that instance.
Well, I'm saying I'll get over it for 1 month so I can get to Ancapistan. But you're saying, well, that means you're okay with redistribution, so why don't we have a society based on it?
You are okay with redistribution in that instance.
Well, no, not really. I'm more saying, if somebody's saying you can either have the status quo or you can have Ancapistan in a month, but the way we get there is by redistributing, then it'd be really weird if I said, well, no. I agree that's still wrong. I'm still saying that redistribution's wrong. I'm just saying I don't care that it's wrong, right? Because then you get to no redistribution ever again. That's Ancapistan.
Well, but then you're saying
I'm saying that I'm willing to do.
You're saying that in that sense it's okay to do something wrong.
I'm saying saying I'm willing to do something immoral once, so then we never do it again. And then you're saying, well, if you're okay with doing it once, then let's do it forever. And it's well, of course not.
No. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Well, you're kind of saying I'm in favor of redistribution, which I'm really not. I'm just saying do it once so we never have to do it again. If somebody says we have to do it once, right?
Well, but I mean, I kind of think that's a cop-out because you're saying in that instance redistribution's okay, but then
no, I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying it's evil, but I do it anyways.
So then you would do something evil.
Yeah. Well, everybody does things evil all the time. I mean, I go and pay taxes. You pay taxes.
But
that doesn't. But your system.
Hold on. No.
Hold on. I apologize for the viewers. I accidentally hit my microphone doing a fine point hand motion. The thing is, your system systematizes that evil thing. And the thing is, I'm saying, well, if you're telling me we can do it once and then remove it from the system forever, then yeah, there's a huge difference. I don't want those things equated at all.
But yours, okay. But then you are using you're imposing a particular belief in the idea that you'll get to your perfect society.
Well, no. Well, I'm not saying I would do it. I'm saying if somebody said, if you had to do that once to undo all the evils of the state, and then you go back to never having a state, would you take that trade? And I'm saying, well, yeah. I'll take that trade. I'm not saying it's ideal, though. Ideally, ideally, tomorrow we wake up, and then it's ancapistan, and then you have some people who are enraged, right? And those people will violate property of people who they think are unfairly just. And then you have a reset, and you have a whole market equilibrium would have to happen. And that's fine. And maybe some wealth voluntarily gets distributed because crazy things happen out there. I'm not like that. That's fine. But I'm saying if somebody said, hey, unredistribute the wealth because the government subsidized too many rich people, and then you can get to ancapistan, then I say, okay, I hate redistribution, but okay, do it once and then we never do it again. It's evil, but do it once and then never again. But every system that like Chomsky supports is kind of based on redistribution.
So why is it okay then?
Because then you never do it again. It's that simple.
No, well, I don't think it is that simple. Because
see, I think you're overreading it. I'm more saying I'm not making a philosophical stance. I'm compromising, right? I'm making a compromised position. I'm just saying, on principle, I oppose it, but I do it once to never do it again.
Okay, but no. But here's the thing. I am also compromising. If I say I want Medicare for all, I am compromising.
Okay, but not all compromises are the same.
Okay. Then we're just quibbling over price.
Well, you could say that, but then there's certainly price I wouldn't take. That's okay.
There's a price I wouldn't take too. So it's like you can say, okay. Hold on.
Okay, that's fine. I'm gonna mute myself so I don't interrupt you again.
So I guess let me try to maybe broaden this out a bit. So what I'm trying to, I guess, get across is that your ideal system and my ideal system involve trade-offs, and that involves that involves some amount of authority, some amount of hierarchy, but we just disagree on we just disagree on the specifics, but we're both pragmatists at that level. You are you would say that well, you even said just now, you said tomorrow there's, if there's ancapistan tomorrow, and you said something about some people go crazy and maybe redistribute some wealth. It's like, okay, but at some level you are agreeing to what you called evil. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, I feel like you criticize me and you say, "Oh, Matthew, you're a statist. You go along with evil. That is wrong. You shouldn't do that." But you are turning around and saying, "I will also go along with evil in certain circumstances." And so, I just don't see a way around this. I feel like ancaps, they're kind of they do these moral purity tests. It's like, I'm not evil, everyone else is evil because they're not an ANCAP. But it's what I'm trying to say is we're all evil at some level, and that there's evil almost built into these, ideological systems, but we don't seem to want to acknowledge that.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to make 2 points on 2 fronts. So one, I made the tactical error of agreeing to something that is not really philosophical and isn't really contingent on my ideas, because I do think there isn't any of that evil in my ANCAP society. The only argument we can make, which is what we just got hung up on, is that there could be evil in the transitionary phase. Now, I wanted to draw a quick chart, and I don't know how well you're going to see.
Really quickly.
Okay, really quickly, yeah.
Okay. I don't think I'm getting hung up. There is evil even built into your ANCAP society, let alone the transitional phase.
Okay, well, we can get into that next, because I don't think there is any, because then it's not based on authoritarianism. So we'll delve into that. That's what we should have been talking about the whole time, but we got hung up on this point, so I need to explain this point, because I'm kind of indirectly getting called contradictory, and I'm really not. And this is a very logical trade-off. Okay, so let's see. So you can't see that very well at all. Okay, so we got this first graph here. You see how it's just a straight horizontal line? That's our current system, right? So that horizontal line is how much evil there is. Now we have this one, right? So there's a horizontal line, but then it drops completely there. And the dashed line shows when other people are in charge of the evil that's going on for the transition phase, right? So you do have some evil that is undoing the state's evil. You're right. That exists. But then the evil goes to zero, because the whole point of ANCAP is it goes to zero on the redistribution front, right? Because you don't have a central planned authority that is stealing people's wealth, confiscating and giving it to other people. So hypothetically, even if I said ANCAP didn't have to start tomorrow, there was a transitionary phase, it wouldn't be contradicting, because that huge layer, because the line doesn't go across all the way now, it cuts off rapidly, and there's only this tiny sliver that would be the intermediary phase. It doesn't really contradict it, because clearly we're not okay with redistribution. That's why we're dropping it to zero. That's kind of what I wanted to get across. And if that's not what you were trying to make the point of, then we just got derailed for 12 minutes. And I apologize, because I take fault for all of it. I was just getting whatever example you gave, I found myself, I felt like I was being, I didn't feel like I was being misrepresented. I more felt like I needed to course correct, because I didn't think that ANCAPs were necessarily like our point was being made correctly. But now, if you want to talk about why ANCAP stuff is evil, go for it. And I do think we do need to do like a full episode on some economic stuff in terms of ANCAP versus ANCOM, because that's kind of why I want to talk about that other debate we watched, because all of his economics are painfully wrong. And ANCOMs do the whole Socrates point you made earlier about how they'll believe things for the sake of it, and you shouldn't do that. That's ANCOM economics. They just say, well, people will do it for the good of society, and then they say that phrase, and they have no real support for that at all, and it's kind of disturbing. So tell me why ANCAPs are evil. I'll give you my 2 cents after you lay that out, and then we can tie up the episode, because we're going over, and I was on a tight constraint today. And hopefully that'll suffice till next week, and then we'll have plenty more arguing next week.
So, well, I guess I also apologize. I was not intending on, like, I wasn't trying to be like go into attack mode. I was just, again, I was thinking about this over the week, and I probably maybe was being a bit too aggressive in the way I was presenting my ideas, but there was no harm intended. You're a good guy. But anyway, I guess I just want to make the simple point. Well, okay, I guess I'll say 2 quick things. So first off, I guess I'm willing to concede that evil or destruction, or however you want to put that, I think that's almost built into what it means to be a human being, and that may be a very unfortunate thing, and we should probably try to minimize those destructive parts of ourselves and of the broader world in as broad a way as possible. I mean, I agree with that. I don't like the evil parts of myself or the evil parts of society, but I guess my problem with ANCAPs, or my problem with their philosophy and their idea, is kind of goes back to what I said. I feel like it is this kind of moral purity test. There will be people who fall through the cracks of an ANCAP society and have terrible lives. And I think it's important to acknowledge that no one political ideology answers all questions that we could ever ask when it comes to what it means to be human.
Yeah. I agree with that completely. No, I don't think everybody would be successful in an ANCAP society. I just think it values freedom and liberty the most, and it values individuals in and above themselves. That's why I like it, because the individualist framework, right? You don't have any authoritarian government pushing anything down onto you. You can make your own decisions, and if you fail as a result of your own poor decisions, then that sucks. You can fall through the cracks, and if you're a person who burned every bridge and nobody will voluntarily help you, then you're really screwed, right? I don't expect ANCAP to resolve stuff for everybody, but it leaves it, the onus is on the individual. It's not on the violence and force endemic to anything the government does through, threatening to put you in a cage for not paying taxes or for interfering in every business interaction in society. And even though we do all those things, we let people fall through the cracks all the time, because the one thing that you could argue that could fail in an ANCAP society fails every day in our current status quo, right? And it's because a lot of statism doesn't even acknowledge that criticism of anarcho-capitalism you're making about people falling through the cracks. But I agree. Yeah, there's a not zero risk of it. I don't feel like it's anybody's obligation to make sure everybody succeeds no matter what. And that's kind of where I see the difference between me and Chomsky, to tie it all back together. And you kind of mentioned these three words, right? You said stateless, classless, and moneyless. You mentioned that three-word phrase. Well, if that's the definition of anarchism, then like ANCAPs can't be anarchist, because we only care about the stateless part. In terms of classless and moneyless, well, I think you need money because you're not going to be bartering. And if you want to do business with other people because they own stuff, then you're going to need money. And then classless, well, I'm going to get all existential, but class is kind of a social construct. It's pretty arbitrary in my opinion. And I think it's inevitable pretty much everywhere you go, as long as people have different tastes and different interests. And some things are deemed kind of lower taste and some things are higher taste. And there are different ways that's going to be endemic. And I see no problem with class differences. So that, and then Chomsky kind of has this idea of anarchism is equality in a way, and he talks about Adam Smith and equality because Chomsky really likes equality. And I like the Yaron Brook, who works at the Rand Institute, has a book called "Equal is Unfair," and I think that's a great phrase, because equality isn't fair because people have different starting points, different inputs, and rightfully get different outcomes. And I'm not saying everybody's end goal is fair, but I'm saying equalizing everybody's end goals is inherently unfair. So if that's the goal of like a stateless society, then I'm already opposed principle one, because I don't think equality is a virtuous end goal by any means. And I think that's where a lot of our differences end up coming out.
Should I give my closing remarks, then you can wrap it up?
Yeah.
Alrighty. So I guess in conclusion, my contention or my disagreement with the ANCAP way of thinking does boil down to, I'm not convinced that the voluntarist, which might be an even better way of describing it, I'm not convinced that these so-called voluntary interactions between people are or should be the end goal. I think that, as I said, I am fairly anti-capitalist. But even putting that aside, I think that equality of a sort is a net good. We can kind of quibble about what kind of equality or what we mean by equality, but the founding fathers, they it's kind of interesting if you think about kind of the debates they were having and their different like political ideas, and I bring it up because I think that in certain respects, I think the founding fathers were influenced a lot by Enlightenment philosophers, and I think a key principle of the Enlightenment is that people are equal, and when I say people are equal, what I mean is not that people are interchangeable. I'm not saying people are the same, but I am saying that the Enlightenment philosophers thought that every individual has a certain level of value and worth that can't be taken away from them, and in that sense, we are all equal. And you mentioned we were in over text message. Sometime you want to talk about jury nullification. The interesting thing when you think about law, people, at least in theory, in the U.S. and a few other countries, people are supposed to be equal before the law. Meaning again that people should not be treated differently because of their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, political opinions, or what have you. And so when I think about anarchism, I am more sympathetic to the traditional form of anarchism because I think it is more in alignment with that Enlightenment idea that I just articulated.
So I'm gonna wrap up the episode. Although what you just said does make me want to do a really nihilist devil's advocate position, because you know how I kind of conceptualize rights, and a lot of the times we hear it framed, it's in the frame of the Bill of Rights and the freedoms from government. And since I'm not in favor of a government, it makes me say, well, are rights really a real thing if all of our rights seem to be a freedom from government? So it does kind of make me want to take a really nihilist sounding devil's advocate position and say, I don't know about that Enlightenment thing, because I don't believe in a God, and I don't really think people are entitled to other people's stuff. And since absence of government doing certain things doesn't mean much to me because I don't think of a government, then how should I conceptualize this? And does that Enlightenment background really even mean anything to me? I'm not sure if it does. So that would almost be fun to explore, I guess, further at some point. I wasn't thinking about much, but the way you kind of bookended that brought it to mind. But on that note, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. It's always fun when we get really triggered, right? Sometimes we're too amicable. I think the last episode was the most agreement we had on a while, because it was pretty much all political analysis. And on political analysis of what's happening, we generally hate the right. We generally hate all of the same people for similar reasons. So that was a nice one where we could kumbaya. We had the kumbaya moment where we both were yeah, these people suck, and this is why people are stupid. And yeah, Joe Biden handled this really poorly, and identity politics are terrible. And in this one, I just was yeah, nah, everything's wrong. And I got really hung up on something, and I'm amped up on caffeine, and you're talking for 3 minutes, and I'm ready to throw my mic by the time it's my turn. So I hope you guys found that entertaining and were not bothered by it. If you were, try again. A lot of the episodes aren't that tense, and we don't talk over each other that much, but it is a nice change of pace. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back next week to talk more about probably anarchism and economics and philosophy, as always. So signing off, it's Mad Matt.